Now it's time for another edition of What Would Jello Do? President Joe Biden, the last 100 days, part 4. Inflation. Everywhere you look, everybody's getting hammered by inflation. Very convenient tool, too, to try and get people bounced. Inflation brought down the presidencies of Gerald Ford. It brought down Jimmy Carter. It brought down the first George Bush. And here we have it coming again. Inflation. Ultra-greedy corporate actors fanning the fires of public panic over inflation, which is very real, especially if you ain't making a lot of money or on a fixed income, but trying to fan those fires to create more inflation so they can run off with yet more money and laugh all the way to the bank. The minute Putin invades Ukraine, the oil companies just start jacking prices, even if we're not running out of oil. And the worst is yet to come if we can't get all that wheat out of Russia and out of Ukraine. Both of them are now stalled, but all across the board, profits are higher than ever, so a lot of this inflation is staged, and it's just a bunch of stealing yet again. According to the Progressive, the cost to our economy of inequality and people at the top just stealing more and more money they're so addicted to they don't even know what to do with it, $1 trillion a year cost of child poverty. $2.6 trillion a year lost to gender and racial wage gaps. 250,000 people in America alone die because of poverty and inequality every year because they can't get health care, they die freezing in the street, you name it. $1.3 trillion and counting lost in the federal coffers because of the tax scam that Trump and McConnell scammed and rammed through in 2017. Great issue to run on, repealing that. $6.4 trillion lost in the endless wars started by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, father of Liz Cheney. And of course, we're still stuck in Iraq, and for that matter, Afghanistan, and the ones we don't talk about in Somalia and in the Sahel and all the other places we're not supposed to be. $3.3 trillion a year because of inaction on climate collapse, causing ever worse floods, ever worse fires, ever worse hurricanes, destroying more and more and more property. You want to bring down inflation? Well, you might want to avoid Gerald Ford here and just getting these win buttons on for whip inflation now. I still have one of those somewhere just to laugh at. It used to be on my punk jacket in '77 as a joke. You want to whip inflation now? How about Medicare for all? Put a lid on prescription drug prices, selective price controls for everything else too. Nixon did it to try and tame inflation, and it helped. Yeah, there was wage freezes too, but something had to be done at that point. It would be way worse now. Prescription drug price control, restore gutted consumer protection laws just by enforcing them. Same for union protections and worker safety laws. And for crying out loud, don't let this situation let anybody goad you into privatizing Social Security. The money hogs whose excess is never enough, they still haven't been able to snatch that one. It works too well. Let's just steal it all. Yeah, then we can play Las Vegas with that and lose that too. Do not succumb to pressure to privatize the Veterans Administration. Good health care for people there. Oh, but let's scam on it and make it worse and loot the money, please. Well, no. Don't privatize anything for that matter, because this is what always happens. It all goes to people up top and they steal the money and everybody gets less. Just ask anybody in a third world country whose water supply got privatized as well as the ones that got privatized here. Hire more meat inspectors, air quality inspectors, water quality inspectors, workplace safety inspectors, you name it. And for that matter, more IRS agents to investigate rich people and corporations cheating on their taxes. The W. Cheney administration just announced they were getting rid of practically all of that. People like me got audited repeatedly instead, and Obama did nothing. 33 states still tax tampons. What is up with that? And if you're really serious about fighting inflation, go bigger, a lot bigger. Go long term, starting with just about the main reason our economy has been in such a shambles and been so unequal, more and more devastation, more and more inequality, private equity. Private equity firms like Bain Capital, the one that Mitt Romney was part of for years and eventually was outed for swiping and taking over tons and tons of independent employers and companies in little towns and other places and just looting them, throwing everybody out of work, killing entire towns, and just moving on to feast elsewhere. Blackstone, another one. Carlyle Group, another really, really bad one, started by, I think, former defense contractors and spooks out of the Reagan administration. You know, Frank Carlucci, former defense secretary, and others. And until recently, the Carlyle Group was run by a guy named Glenn Youngkin, who made a major fortune and bought the governor's mansion in Virginia with it, running a super racist campaign about critical race theory and cleaning up schools and this and that. All a scam, a much bigger scam. They're already talking about running him for president in 2024 as the kinder, gentler, more adult version, alternative, the moderate to Trump and DeSantis and the rest of them. Youngkin is a monster. And they just con businesses, then they loot them, then they move on to the next tasty-looking prey, which is why they call it vulture capitalism. Vultures now control assets of $7.3 trillion, which I think is bigger than the annual budget of the United States, is it not? It is bigger than Tesla, bigger than Amazon, Microsoft, Apple combined. Pioneered, I think, way back in the Nixon era, a little thereafter, when three evil genius pirates, at least there's some of the first, who broke off from Bear Stearns, named Jerome Kohlberg, Henry Kravis, that name should be familiar, one of the most notorious corporate raiders ever to this day, George Roberts, and they became corporate raider number one as KKR to this day. Kravis alone has an estate that he camps out on when he's not at his other places. It's worth $50 million. He needs a $50 million house. It's not just Bill Gates. And even they went even more wild, all the private equity people, after Bill Clinton arranged to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, which was enacted after the Depression to stop private consumer banks from taking our money and playing Las Vegas with it and losing it. As soon as it got lifted, they did it again. 2008 economic collapse, and Glass-Steagall still has not been restored. And they got even more wild after the collapse, just raking in more and more and more money and then just sitting on it when they weren't using it to swallow and destroy other people's companies and other people's lives. Now they've gone after everything from take over and loot Toys R Us, take over and loot Sears Roebuck, take over and loot all kinds of different companies, newspapers too. They still light up the Oakland Tribune building at night, but where's the Oakland Tribune? It's been folded into this tiny little thing called the East Bay Times because everything got looted by private equity and hostile takeovers. East Bay Times, Contra Costa Times, all these other papers. And then, we'll have one person here as a Contra Costa desk, another one here, and we'll call it a paper for the East Bay. Yeah, right. And they've been setting their sights on and raiding music catalogs and things like crazy, if not entire labels. One of them took over EMI And the guy promptly said, okay, now that I'm running it, musicians have got to work again. I want 2 albums a year out of everybody. They need to be on the road the rest of the time. My orders. So people like U2 and Radiohead walked off the label and pulled their catalogs too. Brilliant. So instead now, they're buying the rights to musicians' catalogs, lock, stock, and barrel. Their recordings, their publishing, their lyrics, their sales of all reproductions of all those recordings. Robbie Robertson, who just did one with a little smaller one of these companies called Iconoclast, they even own his face now. Yeah. And they don't, and I can't find out, they haven't divulged in the articles announcing this Iconoclast place, whether they're getting their money from Blackstone or KKR or Carlyle or another one of the big boys, because they clearly have got a lot of money to throw around. It should not all go to private equity, especially after one of the people they own and operate by the name of Dirty Donnie Trump-a-muck did a huge favor for Blackstone Steven Schwartzman, allowing private equity firms to play Las Vegas with people's 401k savings. Take that and play with it too and risk losing it all for people who suddenly have nothing to live on when they retire again. Biden, campaigning in 2020, called it another example of Trump putting the interests of Wall Street ahead of American workers and families. No shit. But now, very quietly, his Labor Department, after studying it, decided they're going to keep it after all. This can and should be reversed, and all you got to do is an executive action, and you can eviscerate this the same way Trump eviscerated people's rights to keep their 401k plans and not have it looted. This could be done as publicly and as educationally as possible, and it can only help chances in the 2022 election if you're willing to cross Wall Street, not really working for them in the first place. And you can also go a lot farther standing firm and public on freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom to be who you are, freedom to love who you are and who you're in love with. Freedom to go to school without worrying all the time about being shot by some teenager who picked up a machine gun on his 18th birthday. Freedom from some family values Christianist with machine guns storming and threatening your school board meetings, all to protect you from critical race theory, which they couldn't define if you asked them, or ever hearing the word gay, so they can force you all to march to their critical racist theories instead. Break up monopolies. Elizabeth Warren is right. Forward to death for big tech. Don't just break up Amazon. Don't just break up Google. Don't just break up Facebook. Dismantle agriculture monopolies and near monopolies through Cory Booker's Farm System Reform Act sitting there in the Senate right now. I'm not sure if the House has even passed that. And with that, for crying out loud, ensure the right to repair. Not just to get your old cell phones fixed or batteries replaced, but this is especially important for farmers who now they get John Deere products and they're practically a monopoly now too. They're not allowed to fix it themselves. Flat tire, you have to take it somehow to John Deere and let them do it and charge you all this extra money. Right to repair, along with defying Tom Vilsack and Monsanto and everybody, farmers should have the right, once again, to save their seeds and plant them next year without being attacked and sued by companies like Bayer Monsanto. It's really vicious out there with stuff like that. Do something and let people in Iowa know you're doing it. You might even get a Democratic senator in the fall. Block more publishers of book publishers. No more hospital mergers. No more big pharma mergers. Shit can the airlines immunity from antitrust laws too. And double down on Trump's Justice Department suit against Google for being too much of a monopoly, and then dismantle all the self-stealing, Freudian slip, self-dealing schemes of Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, and make them disclose their algorithms to the public, causing so much trouble and making people so hateful and violent in the first place. Aim an extreme wealth tax. That'll get public support back at these damn oligarchs. Tax all excess wealth they scammed since the pandemic. And you could raise trillions for the budget just in a simple 1 or 2 pennies on the dollar for every single stock transaction. If they can do it at lightning speed digitally with bots, you can add that on digitally with bots as well and collect. And you give all this money and stimulus money in part to big business, ban spending it on stock buybacks to drive up the price and line executive pockets. There's also a little-known federal agency called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, I guess, which is described as a secret mini Supreme Court who uses cost-benefit analysis to reject key new regulations and executive actions across the board when they deem them too damaging to the corporate bottom line. They could just be fired tomorrow. Strip them. Get rid of them. And why on earth is one of the most infamous Trump looters and crooks, Louis DeJoy, still running the Postal Service? Isn't there enough people on the Postal Service board on there now, or at least appoint them as acting members if McConnell blocks them, to fire that dude before he does any more damage? Yeah, I think you finally got through wiping out the Postal Service having to pay all this money since 2006, prepay retirees' pensions to 2030 for people who haven't even been born yet and stuff. I think they finally got rid of that. None of it was saved anyway. It just got absorbed into the federal general fund. It was already gone. And DeJoy just made a deal to replace all the mailman trucks and postal carrier stuff with a new fleet. It could have been done with electric vehicles. He deliberately bought hundreds of thousands of gas guzzlers instead. That can still be nixed and undone. And you have to wonder why DeJoy, the way he's deliberately slowing down mail and trying to shut down post offices, slow down the mail to help credit card companies so they can charge more late fees when payment doesn't get there in time. He has his fingers in that financial pie to benefit himself as well. Plus, another great missed opportunity with the Postal Service. We badly need a federal public bank. Like North Dakota has a state bank. Pittsburgh has a city bank. So Wells Fargo, Bank of America, none of the others get to watch the city of Pittsburgh's money and charge gazillions of dollars of interest to the city every year that they could be spending on public services. Federal bank. Up until, the mid-60s, post offices actually acted as small-time banks, and you could do your banking there and not get hurt. Federal bank, you could get much more favorable loans to buy a home and not wind up homeless or way behind in rent all this time. These things have to be acted on, if not at least proposed, right now. Because in the long run, as James Baldwin once said, in Notes of a Native Son, those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it. That means us.